This joke is that there are only two hard problems in computer science: naming things, cache invalidation, and off by one errors. Little joke. But today we're talking about naming cloud resources with Mikhail Shilkov. We're going to cover how to take control of resource naming, what the benefits and implications of name mangling are, what name mangling is, how you can have naming standards and how that will affect all of that. And hopefully by the end, we'll get a nice demo. But you also understand like how you can have standardized naming conventions that actually scale and work across your cloud. But yeah, first, Mikhail, introduce yourself and tell me about this ticket that you created some years ago, because I think it's important to this whole story.
Hey, I'm pleased to be here today with you, talking about auto naming at Pulumi. I'm a software engineer at Pulumi. I've been working here for about 5 years on the open source. I just closed with the PR that we launched just a few weeks ago. As you can see, that was in June 20. I was just
Wow.
giving it a try for the first time ever, and I was trying to map the resources that we were managing in Azure to a program in Pulumi. And the very first thing that got me surprised is that the names of resources that I would get in Azure would differ from the ones that I defined in the program. So I would type something like my resource group, and then in the cloud, I would get my resource group plus some random suffix at the end of the name that Pulumi created for me without asking. And at my company, we had strict naming guidelines about how exactly we should name resources. So I created this ticket asking whether I can influence that auto naming and get rid of the resources, or rather override it with the naming schema that we prefer to my past employer.
Like name mangling is a term I've heard before in compilers, and you can see right away there's a suggestion like let's turn off name mangling, but that was the thing you were seeing. And so the problem is Pulumi can enable you to do lots of things with your resources, but one way it does that is by adding something to the end of your names, and that allows you to do things like you can have a dev environment and a prod environment, right? And they won't collide even though you have these two resources with the same name because we're differentiating them with these things. This is used in a lot of places, like C++ uses name mangling to do namespaces. So if you have like two classes and they're inside two different namespaces, when it's compiled, it actually is changing those names so that they don't collide with each other after the namespaces are moved out. But so what happens next? Like obviously you put up the ticket, and then like how'd you end up here? Is it related to this?
Well, maybe I just enjoyed the product so much, and it worked so much better than what we used to use at the company back then, that I just fell in the way to join our forces, and I joined a couple of years later the company. So it wasn't that I joined just to fix this ticket, otherwise I would do it a long time ago. But that was sort of an itch that I had all that time. But of course, I learned why Pulumi does that, and there are good reasons for this, as you sort of alluded to. This is largely to avoid name collisions. So you give beautiful short names to your resources in a program, but Azure users, as I was at the time, have particularly strong stance about how their resources should be named, and usually have some sort of internal policy about how naming is consistently applied in the company. So it took us a while. It's sort of like, it's not a make or break feature kind of feature that people make product decisions on, but it's a very important convenience feature that we are finally happy to ship in the end. And we solved it by providing you maximum flexibility. So we decided that we want to cover all the required use cases in this ticket, either disable auto naming for people who want just that, give you full control over the names that you could specify the format for yourself, or some sensible defaults for different scenarios. So we made it so that simple things are simple to configure, but if you need some sort of advanced configuration, that's also possible with the deeper configuration knobs that we documented with this change.
Yeah, because like out of the box, if you don't care about what these resource names look like, that's kind of how I treat it, right? Like there's like a logical name, and I just try to worry about that and not so much about what it's going to look like in my cloud console. But if you do care, right, that's where you had to go deep on setting up all these patterns.
So I decided to lead with Azure and C#. As I said, that's one particular subset of our users who are, I think, more passionate about resource names and want full control about the names that Pulumi applies to cloud resources. So I have a sample C# application here. It's not really important that I'm using C#. It applies equally to all languages that Pulumi supports, from TypeScript to Python to YAML and so on. But this is just an example. In this program, I have 3 resources: a resource group, a storage account, and a container in that storage account. So some sort of file storage in the cloud, very simple. And you already mentioned logical names. So every Pulumi resource has to have a logical name, and that's the first parameter that you supply to all constructors. In this case, catalog RG is the logical name of that resource. So what Pulumi does by default, it will take this logical name and to calculate or build up a physical name of the cloud resource, it will add a random suffix to it. And it will do this for every resource that the actual properties here would show you the physical resources, the resource names that will deploy to the cloud. In this case, it's going to be catalog RG and then 7 or 8, seven random characters after that to ensure that it's random. And the same applies, for example, the account name here. So this is the behavior that we have by default. What if you want to change that? Well, for this, we have a new configuration knob. And in my project, I have 2 stacks. So dev stack is the one that I showed you before. It has no configuration here. And then the named stack has the new configuration value.
Oh, wow.
To demonstrate the possibilities. So that's
So
actually
what we saw before was like the name mangling, where it's adding something random
exactly.
onto it.
And that can be a surprise. It was a surprise to me, and it can be a surprise for users because like you have to know to go here and look at the name that is about to provision, or otherwise you will only see it after the resource is deployed in your cloud console somewhere.
Yeah.
And that's the only name mangling we do. So like we don't prepend any prefixes, we don't do anything else. It's just a random suffix at the end. It kind of slightly depends on the provider. So if you do AWS, I believe, I think the suffix length might be different, or we have dashes. So it's slightly different per provider as well. So now I want to show how you can change that to your liking. So the very simplest way is that you can override the setting for all your resources in this project or in this stack. So you can configure this per project. In this case, you will do it in Pulumi YAML, the same way as I'm doing it in Pulumi stack YAML, but I wanted to show 2 stacks and compare them side by side, so I'm doing this just for this stack called named. Then I have new configuration key here, namespace Pulumi, so that's our first party namespace. And then the configuration key is auto-naming. And that allows you to change the naming convention for all resources and all providers at the same time. So if you just say pattern like here, it would apply to all resources regardless if it's Azure, AWS, or some smaller niche providers, whatever you use in your program. And we have a few possibilities here. So we have mode first. So some people just asked to disable name mangling altogether, like don't do anything with names and require me to always specify a name mangler in my program. Probably that's another thing that I should mention. Like I jumped over this, but if you wanted before the change, if you wanted to specify the exact name that you want to have, for example, for this storage account, you can always say account name in this case, and then do like documents. If you do just this, we will respect this precise name and we'll try to deploy resource with this name. It's likely that somebody in the world already created a storage account called documents. So it could be documents Mikhail. Maybe it will still conflict, I guess. There are lots of Mikhails in the world, but then we could do, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, and then it will probably deploy. But then now it's your job to define the exact name that you want to deploy inside the program. So if you just want that.
This is probably why, this ticket has been sitting so long, because there was always a workaround. Like if you want to take control of this yourself.
Yeah, and a lot of people ended up building some sort of helper functions for these names there, where they would pass like stack name or some configuration values into it, and then they would build like a templating system on their own to specify these names. One downside of this solution, though, is that you don't get the benefit that we discussed before of no downtime deployments. So if you specify this particular name, Pulumi is not able anymore to create a new copy of the resource, deploy it first before shutting down the old one. So if it's a virtual machine or a website, you named it explicitly, we'll create it. But then if it needs replacement at some point, then Pulumi will know that you specified the explicit name and it cannot mangle with names anymore. So it will have to delete first and then create a new copy with the same name. So it leads to downtime. That's one downside of this approach that they had to follow in the past.
It's cool though that people could build their own little solution on top. Like that's the power of the Pulumi just uses code that you could write a function and call it to like set a name.
Yeah, definitely. That's again one of the reasons why it took us so long, is that because you can use just the tools that you have with the programming language environment to make it as you want to produce names according to company policies, and you can also store those names as a library, for example, in your company and reuse across multiple projects and all of that. All the beauty of TypeScript, C#, Python, and so on. So my first mode here that I showed is disabled, and that basically requires you to specify names all the time. So if that's your policy, some people want that. They want to enforce everybody who writes code to specify name. I personally don't think that's a great thing to do in most cases. So, but that's a possibility. The other mode here is kind of similar, but different. If we say mode about him, then we'll calculate physical names to be exactly precisely equal to the logical names here. So you don't have to specify it in your code twice, but we'll just take documents in this case and we'll try to deploy resource with documents. We'll do the same for catalog, RG, and slides, and all of other resources. So if you want to sort of get what you see in the preview in the name column, the same thing in the cloud, that's possible with this mode. Previously is the most powerful one where you can sort of specify your own pattern for names. And if our viewers would go after the session to our docs, they will see all the possibilities that you can include into this. It usually has to have the name bit somewhere at the beginning, at the end, it doesn't really matter. But that would be the logical name that you gave to resources. And then there are a few knobs here, like in this case, I'm trying to keep it simple. I just append a stack name to all the names. So this will go through every resource and then append a stack name to the logical name that I gave. So I can show it real quick. I will need to select a different stack because I'm selecting named, and then I can do Pulumi up again. It will deal with it again, and my stack is called name, as I said a couple of times. If I do the preview, and you can see that there are no random suffixes anymore, and this is resolved to the stack name in every resource here. So it's a documents named and slides named and so on and so forth.
So how does that work with the whole zero downtime thing? Because now in my stack, I can't rename something, right? Or
yeah, that's a great question. It does not work in this case because the pattern that you specified does not contain any randomness in it. So it's going to be deterministic every time with a resource in the same stack, right? And again, Pulumi is smart enough to understand that this pattern is not random. So it will not try to create a second copy of the same resource with the same name. It will delete the old resource first, and then it will create a new copy with downtime potentially. So if you want to introduce randomness in some place, so my ID is helping me here. So this is one example. So again, all the expressions are listed in the docs, but you can generate random alphanumeric suffix, sort of hexadecimal, the one that we did before the change. Just numbers, UUID, if you fancy that, a bunch of possible random bits here. And as soon as you do that, then Pulumi will use the no downtime approach again. So it will create a new resource with a new name that will not match the previous one because the random seed will change, so it will not collide anymore. And it will deploy a new copy of the resource, and only after that it will delete the previous one.
Very cool.
And another possibility is that you can, so this is just sort of one line change in your code to apply all resources. But if you want to be even more fine-grained, if I just roll back to my original config file that I had before, you can also configure resource auto naming on different levels. So that this is the top level. This applies to all providers globally. But then if you want to override it per specific resource type, you can do both. So you can, if you wanted to do something for all resources in Azure, you could do that. It's sort of, in my case, it overrides the global one because there are no other providers in my sample program. But if you had multiple providers, you could configure it per provider. Or in this case, as we discussed, I defined the deterministic name on the top level, but then I have a couple of problems because accounts, we discussed that they have to be globally unique, so there has to be some randomness there. Plus, they don't allow dash. It's an old resource type in Azure, so dash will cause an error if we try to deploy this with this naming convention.
Oh, wow.
So companies usually have like a special case rule for this storage account where they would global rule, but then remove all the dashes. And it also has to be lowercase, by the way. So I can achieve this by defining the special pattern just for this resource type and excluding characters that are not allowed for the specific resource. And then another example I have here is for blob containers. And blob containers are kind of like folders, right, in your cloud storage. And probably it doesn't make much sense to mangle with those names, like simple names like I have slides here. So that's the folder name that I want to get in my cloud account. They don't have to be globally unique. They don't have to be deployed with zero downtime.
Yeah.
These are just folders. So to keep it simple, I can set mode and provide it here to just copy the logical name to the physical name so that all my blob containers are named predictably and without duplication, so I don't have to type container name twice in without definition. I'll just take these slides and go with it. So if I save this file and run the preview again, it should now respect all those knobs that I defined on the resource type level. So the container name is just slide now, and then the account name has this goofy name documents named with 4 extra characters.
It's crazy how complex it gets once you pull back the curtain, right? Like you started off, okay, we just need a way to configure name mangling, but it's like certain resources have specific naming schemes. Some things like folders, we actually don't have a downtime concern. Some things we do. Like it's interesting. It's so complex once you get into the weeds.
Yes, and also to add to this complexity is you don't really see this in my example, I think, but we also have a feature where providers sort of have the possibility to intervene at the last point and make a decision where they know that your name is not optimal. Like we use this in a few places. For example, some resources just have to be UUIDs. Like there are no human readable names there. They call names, but they are just UUIDs. And then what we try to achieve is that you just provide a global policy like this. You don't want to see those resources to like start failing to deploy because they would try to apply your pattern to resources where it doesn't make sense. So the provider has a moment where they would say, no, I really know that this resource should not have this name, and I'll just use the strategy that I have in there.
It's the story of writing software, is finding that there's more and more complexities and conditions you have to handle, like the deeper you get.
Right. It's one line in the config file, but it's sort of a negotiation protocol because between the user, the engine, and the provider and the cloud, and they have to agree on some name that would work for everyone.
It's awesome. Did we cover it all?
Yeah, I think so. So this is released as of last week or 2 weeks ago in GA. There was like a 1 month period of preview for this feature, but now it's in the CLI, so you have to get the latest version of the CLI. And we have a blog post as well that describes this feature and gives another example. And it also lists the versions of the providers that you have to have this working. So of course, we had to change multiple building blocks across Pulumi ecosystem. So you have to have them all in your environment so that it works properly. Otherwise, it will give you like warnings that this feature is not supported for that provider, for example. So the blog post lists the versions of the CLI that you need to upgrade to and the versions of major providers. All the major providers support this feature by now.
So how did it feel? Like you comment, I'm trying to find it, where you closed this after so many years. I don't know why I'm not seeing it here. Here we go. Like, how did this, I don't know, did it feel good to like be able to say?
Yeah, definitely. That felt great on multiple levels. One, just from the very first ticket that I ever opened at Pulumi, I got to resolve myself. And then we also had I want to mention that we also had a very transparent design process around this feature. So we had an RFP, sort of request for proposals of how to fix this feature before we started implementing. We had like a public design document. And I'm grateful to people who went there and spent non-trivial time understanding the proposal and commenting on the details, and that helped us refine the approach, materially change the design decisions and some configuration knobs that we introduced. So I'm grateful to those people who provided feedback in the ticket, provided feedback to the proposal, and then also tried the preview version of this feature. So that felt like a great collaboration with the community and my colleagues. So on that level, I'm happy as well.
Yeah, I feel like you can, from what you showed, but there's so many options and ways to set values and deal with different resources in different ways. Like it shows that there was like a feedback process, right? There was people with like specific concerns, and how can we come up with a global strategy that lets us handle all of these? The other thing I think is really cool about this was like how in the meantime, people could just use code to just solve it themselves. Like, I guess it didn't work for things that required zero downtime, but for other things, like just because with Pulumi, you just use your programming language of choice, you could just roll your own. I think those are both like very cool, just kind of things that fell out of this.
Yeah, definitely. And by looking at what people do in their code, we also learned what kind of solution we need to provide.
That's awesome. Okay, so there you have it. Mikhail, thanks for joining me. Yeah, this is amazing. So for next steps, right, you can check out the auto naming documentation at Pulumi. Try the feature once you upgrade to that version. Join the community. Share your thoughts, right? This whole thing was born out of people talking and sharing things. Yeah, and remember, if you're managing existing cloud resources, Pulumi can import them and standardize the names. I think it was called out in the blog post. That is a super cool feature. Yeah, thank you, Mikhail, and thank you for watching our video.